Hey, welcome everybody to another Thriveabetes video interview. And today I am with Ken Barclay from Dublin. And Ken is well known from the Thriveabetes tech crew because he's been volunteering since day one at the Thriveabetes event. So he will be a familiar face to you. He is also very well known in the Dublin Adults with Type 1 Diabetes support group, and through his support in the do-it-yourself artificial pancreas system community as well, which is also known as DIYAPS. So thank you so much, Ken, for joining us today. And we're going to kick straight into it and just go straight into your diagnosis story. So if you can tell me what you remember from it.
Yeah, of course. No, well, number one, thanks very much for having me, Ronnie. It's great to get the opportunity to do this. And I'm only slightly disturbed that I'm well known in the diabetes community, but we'll move swiftly on. I was diagnosed when I was 10, which is 30 years ago now. And it was all the classic symptoms. No one in my family had picked it up. It was no one with diabetes in my family or social group at that stage. So usual thirst, frequent urination, all the rest. And it all came to a head one weekend when I was staying with my aunt and uncle. And I vividly remember getting up in the middle of the night and drinking most of a 3-litre bottle of lemonade, which certainly didn't help matters. But, eventually it got bad enough that I was to the GP, and the GP took one look at me and diagnosed me on the spot, ran the tests, and then I was sent off to Crumlin.
Okay, so I didn't realize it was 30 years ago. So wow, you beat me out in the years with diabetes competition that we don't have. So initially as a 10-year-old child, I mean, in our pre-interview chat, you talked about, from the get-go, you had the rebellious streak and, maybe your mother was a saint and your father. So do you want to talk a little bit about those early years and moving through those childhood years?
Absolutely. No, and look, my parents were excellent, as were the clinic staff in Crumlin at the time. Now, of course, in those days, there was no online community or any other community that we were aware of. We didn't know anyone else with type 1 diabetes. And that was the case for a good chunk of all of my childhood and a decent part into my adult life. I know we'll talk about that more later on. But so it felt very much we were on an island. There was no information. The clinic were helpful, I wouldn't fault them there, but I wasn't. I fought against it hard from the start. My parents did their best, and they put a lot of work and a lot of sleepless nights into trying to keep me on the rails. But with type 1 diabetes, eventually the child takes control themselves. It's an inevitability. And when I did take control, I went off the rails completely. Very poor control. I didn't engage with the services. I have some very creative stories I've told before about faking blood glucose results. But yeah, all the bad things I did. I was absolutely terrible example of it. I'm not sure why. I think it was just an acceptance thing. I couldn't accept that I was different, that I'd have to live my life in a different way, and very much resented it. So all the bad things. I ate what I want. I skipped insulin. It was bad. I was blessed in that I came out of it with no long-term complications, or very few long-term complications. Touch wood, may that continue. But no, it was rough. It was a bad time. Yeah.
And do you think that was totally down to not knowing anybody else with diabetes, or can you even guess at why you reacted that way?
I don't know. It's a really hard question to answer. I never asked myself that question at the time, and it's hard to look back after all these years and try and figure it out. I think it would have been of assistance, and it's certainly what fixed it on the other end was meeting other people with diabetes and starting to have conversations and realizing I wasn't alone in how it was handled. At the time, I was a stubborn little yoke. It's quite possible I just would have ignored them. I said, no, I'm different. I don't know. Okay. I do think we're lucky now. We live in a different age. For children and adults, that people are having those conversations. It is very much normalized, and we can see that online and offline. It's grown, and people are far more open about talking about it. And also, we're talking early 90s here, and the regimes then were so different. You were on fixed insulin doses. You were eating at the same time every day, the same amount every day. And I certainly didn't appreciate being told that, at 10:30 in the morning, I needed to eat 2 slices of bread or, a couple of crackers, whatever the prescribed meal was. I just couldn't do it. I came up with my own version of MDI, which was, inject when you wanted. I was chasing highs basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, you and I are diagnosed within a couple of years of each other. So I do remember the injections, the early injections, twice daily in insulin, and it was very regimented, basically, very structured, very regimented, no flexibility. So yeah, I suppose that wouldn't have helped as a child.
No.
No. So then, because let's talk about the transition. So you would have been in Crumlin then up until your late teens, and then you
18,
transitioned, into the adult services, and there was a big difference there.
There was, yeah. So when I turned 18, I finished up in Crumlin, and I changed then to going to James's Street, which was near to where I went to college. And I say I engaged. I went into my first couple of appointments, and I just found that it's a very different experience, and again, no bad word to the clinic. This is all on my shoulders. They were quite happy. Well, they weren't quite happy. I was quite happy to ignore it, and they weren't in a position to chase it up. The facilities weren't there to engage with patients. They still aren't to some extent. An awful lot of good outcomes in diabetes rely on the patient being engaged and going to the clinic and pushing, because the clinics are, they're overwhelmed in many cases of trying. They can't be reaching out to people who are struggling and offering to help. And I mean, I know there's a lot of call from various people and organizations that, the kind of the psychiatric side of things needs to be looked at as well, the mental side of diabetes, because it is a big burden, and we're all too aware of that. But that wasn't there. And certainly that's it. So I went to a couple of clinical appointments in James's, and I just kind of slowly backed away from it. I just stopped going. I stopped engaging. I could pick up my prescriptions. That didn't change. And although I will have a good rant about that law that says we have to get our prescriptions renewed every 6 months, it is there for a reason, and that reason is what I was doing, 20 years ago. In that I could completely ignore my clinic and happily and indefinitely skip into the chemist and pick up my medication.
Yeah. And then, so you were in college and attending a clinic that wasn't really working for you. And I mean, I would say that the lack of resources is widespread throughout the diabetes services and the HSC, even from back then. So you're in a very different place now, but you can kind of pinpoint the start of that journey changing, can't you? And it was third year in college.
So I went into DKA purely through mismanagement, and again, I was just occasionally and nearly randomly dialing up insulin just to keep myself functional. But I'd lost a load of weight. I didn't look healthy, and went into DKA. I effectively collapsed in college one day, and my friends brought me to the nurse on site, who was a very lovely woman, and I can't apologize enough to her for what I put her through that day. I again fought back again. I didn't like the concept that I was sick with diabetes. I wasn't going to go to the hospital. I fought. She eventually convinced me to go, and I went into James's Street with DKA, which was a spectacularly unpleasant experience, as anyone who's gone through DKA will know. And that kind of had me stepping back a little bit and saying, okay, I can't ignore this anymore. I need to re-engage. So I went to my GP because I didn't want to go back to James's. I decided that didn't work for me, and again, okay. no finger of blame at the clinic here at all, but I needed a fresh start. So I went to the GP, and the GP recommended telehospital to me. So I got the referral letter done there, and I went in. I went in certainly with the intention that I was going to get on top of this. I didn't. I'm not saying it was a success story. It isn't all roses and happiness after that. It most definitely is not. But that was the start of me really engaging with my diabetes in a fashion that I was trying to treat it, whereas before I was ignoring it. Now there are more periods afterwards when I ignored it again. But that was quite the turning point for me. There's been a few turning points like that in my life, but that was a big one.
That was a big one. So what year would that have been then? That would have been, if we're
That
talking
was
1991, 2001?
2001 exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then, I mean, what was the difference then between the two services? Did you feel like you got a bit more?
I got a bit more. Part of that was the clinic. I think they were just in a better place, resource wise than James's was at that time. And part of it was my own attitude to it, that I was engaging more, and I was going in asking questions, and not just going in to tick a box of saying, right, well, I've been to clinic, and maybe I got some blood drawn, and maybe I didn't. I was getting my bloods drawn, and in case my consultant sees this video, I'm certainly not claiming that I was perfect from then on, or at any point in my diabetes journey. But that's when I did start going in again, and I ended up with a good consultant in there, who I won't name because this is going on the internet. But he's excellent. He really he's made a huge amount of progress for me with my diabetes over the years, despite my insulin resistance at times. But I found it very much came in waves. So I every so often we right, that's it. I'm doing this right. Loads of blood tests. Watch the carbs. Closely match insulin to it. But then equally after a few months or maybe even a year, something would just click inside, and the off switch would come on, and I'd be just right. I can't do this anymore, and slip back into old habits. And that continued for my 20s basically. Yeah.
So do you feel that was an element of burnout that you were just bouncing back into consistently?
I think so. Yeah, I think so, definitely. I think at some level I still didn't accept it completely underlying, and I after those few months or even longer stretches, it'd just be right. I can't, I just can't do this anymore. I can't deal with it. And again, I went into bad old habits of skipping insulin and just randomly, taking medication when I felt sick enough to justify it. It wasn't a pleasant way to live. Now, don't get me wrong, I was still living my life, and I felt that by ignoring things, it was letting me live my life rather than what it was actually doing, which was hindering. I was getting stuff done. I finished college, I got a job. I moved careers a couple of times, and so I was getting those things done, but I didn't realize I was getting those things done in spite of the stress and trauma I was putting myself through.
Yeah, so I suppose you didn't realize that it was more difficult than it needed to be.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, we're going
to. Sorry, just one
no. You go ahead. Yeah.
It's something I struggle with today is sharing that information. And I really don't like sharing my blood glucose details with my wife. It's completely irrational. She's completely supportive of everything I do. But I've been out with fellow diabetics, having dinner, and going, oh yeah, well, my husband, my wife, they follow my things on Desktop. They've actually commented they can see me freeze up when that topic comes up. It's another mental hurdle I have to get over.
Yeah, but yeah. Oh,
there aren't easy answers to this from Grania. We're far too sober to really consider it. Yeah.
It's just never been put that way for me before. I mean, there's not many instances where you would have to share your glucose information with people other than your doctors and your nurses. And I suppose it's only in recent years, year or two, that I share my CGM with my husband. So I was like, but that was safety for me and comfort for him.
Yeah. And logically, it makes complete sense. I have a mental hang up on it.
Yeah. But one thing I will say is he never passes comment on them, which I think might be important.
That is very important. Yeah. And I think anyone who does that, and certainly don't let my ways be an example. They certainly are not. I do think that's something that requires very clear ground rules, because yourself, if you're running high or low, tempers can be short, and an ill-timed comment could end up with a very lengthy argument.
Yes, or in divorce.
Yes.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the technology aspect, and then we'll continue on that conversation in part 2 of our video, because I know we have a lot to talk about there. But you're one of the early adopters of an insulin pump. So do you want to talk me through what
Yeah,
prompted you to go that direction?
again, it was kind of a desperation move, you know, and I've already outlined how I was struggling with my diabetes, and my consultant recommended an insulin pump on the basis of if I had that plugged into me, at the very least, I would have my basal insulin taken care of every day, you know. So no matter how much I ignored it, once I had the pump plugged in, some insulin was going into my system, um, which was a real logical move, to be fair, and a brave one considering how new diabetes pumps were in Ireland at the time.
I just want to mention that that was 2004.
Yes, sorry, I should have put a date on it. Yeah, 2004.
No, that's
so
okay.
we're about 3 years into my post-revelation life with diabetes there. And I was engaging with it, and I know as a mutual friends will say quite happily, diabetic retail therapy is brilliant. A new little gadget is all the difference in the world when you're something new to play with. And part of the reason for me going to the pump was that, and part was the very logical conclusion my consultant proposed. So yeah, I jumped on board with that. Now this was before carb counting courses were a thing. So I'm in an ongoing tug of war with my clinic that I will, 16, 17 years into my pump therapy, get my carb counting course done at some point in the future. But yeah, so that was a big game changer for me. That shifted the battle entirely. As I said, I was getting insulin consistently, which is something that I wasn't managing to do myself. It was much easier to take insulin, so there was no worrying about pens and all the rest of it. And as you and maybe other people are aware, I'm a big proponent of pumps. I think they're fantastic. They're not a magic bullet, but they certainly, for me, they were a significant game changer.
Okay, and we're going to pause now for part 1 of our video, and we'll continue in our next video. So bear with us, viewers.